Okay, we are in a sermon series called Power of Promise. And it started on the day before Valentine's Day with Love is a Promise, which was just kind of an introduction to the sermon series. And then last month on our previous service, we were started into our first lesson, which was about Cain and Abel and the choices that they made. And so promise presents choice. And today the subject of the sermon is promises must be shared. Promises must be shared. And we're going to be talking about Enoch. And he was an Old Testament character, really, that was hardly mentioned in the Bible. There's only a few places where he's mentioned. And yet one place in the New Testament, he is listed among the elders as being this great man of faith and an example for us to follow. So it's really curious that he has very little exposure in the Bible, and yet he has this lofty position among the disciples. So let's see who Enoch was, and let's just take a minute to dive into Enoch's life and survey the scriptures that are in the Bible. The first thing to know about Enoch is, when was he born? Well, he was a descendant of Adam, and he was born in the 7th generation, or 6 generations after Adam. He was 7th generation human according to scriptures, and that's a good place to find that is 1 Chronicles chapter 1, first couple of verses there. The scriptures are really very simple. It's just a list of the names of the genealogy. So Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. And of course there you can see on the screen Adam's at the top, and then each generation is represented as this person had this child, this person had this child. And besides the person in the list, then they had other children as well. So the next point, he was the father of Methuselah, and that's in Genesis chapter 5, 21 and 24. And it reads, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years, according to Scripture. Another point is he was the ancestor of Jesus. And that's found in Luke chapter 3, 23 to 38. Now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph, the son of Heli, the son of, and Luke recounts the entire genealogy all the way back. It's just column after column of son of this person, son of that person, until you finally get down to verse 37, the son of Methuselah, who was Enoch's son, and then the son of Enoch. So, let's look at Enoch's world that he was born into. Again, he lived 6 generations after Adam, and originally when it was just Adam and Eve, the scriptures would have us think that the world was completely empty, just Adam and Eve. And if you look at this view of the world, and there's nobody else in it, everyone that was born came from the first 2 individuals. And so you would have to go in and figure out how many people there could possibly be. That would be an exercise you could do with generations doubling every 30 years, every 20 years. You've heard the old idea, you can take a penny and double it, and double it, and double it. And by the end of the month, you've got $1 million in the bank. Well, that's kind of the idea, is originally the world was empty, but after 622 years of people having children, you could have a whole lot of people. So I won't go into the exercise of figuring out, how many people there could be, but there was a lot of people. It wasn't an empty world anymore. It was also a violent world. Of course, last time we talked about Cain and Abel, and the imagery of Cain killing his brother Abel, and that was just basically in the first generation of children. Just the first children that was born, there was already murder happening. So the world that Enoch lives in was a world of violence. They didn't just live out in the woods, though. People lived in cities. As you start to get lots and lots of people, they had to organize themselves. They went off together. They had to set their houses in order, and there were cities that was recorded in the Scripture. Genesis chapter 4, 16 to 17. Again, this was last time we talked about this. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden, building a city, and he named it after his son, Enoch. I brought this point up specifically because the Enoch who is Cain's son is not the same Enoch that we're studying today. So maybe Enoch was the John Smith of that day. Maybe it was just a common name. Another possibility is Cain was second generation, so if he went off and founded a city, maybe that city was known among the people that lived around it, and maybe the Enoch we're talking about today may have been named after the city. I forget who it was that said, it was a comedian, but he said, never play cards with a guy who's named after a city. So if you sit down and you're playing poker and the guy across the table is named Houston or Dallas over here, no, just get up and leave. You don't want to be named after a city. But the city Enoch was the first recorded city, and we're talking about Enoch, but it is a different Enoch. Again, what was Enoch's world like? And we know that it was a world of violence, but in general, evil was increasing in the world. Cain and Abel, maybe that was just one day of their entire lives that act of violence happened. But more and more, as there got to be more people, more opportunity to do harm and raise arguments and hatreds, evil was increasing in the world. Just a chapter or two ahead, Genesis chapter 6, the Lord saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth. His heart was filled with pain. God is a being of emotion. If we're created in his image and we feel pain sometimes and regret, God is greater and feels emotions more intensely than we do. And the record there is that he was sorry that he had ever made man because there was so much evil. Of course, we could connect that with the world which we live in today, where people are, slavery is big in the world, but behind the scenes. Prostitutions and child kidnappings and all sorts of things like that. We can connect that. How does God feel about our world today? But Enoch was the exception to the rule. Enoch was the one bright star. What did Enoch do? Well, he walked with God. He served God. And that's back in Genesis chapter 5 where we were. Let's focus on verses 22 and 24. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years. Enoch walked with God. What else did Enoch do? Well, Enoch prophesied and preached about God's impending judgment. He lived in a world where evil was rampant, where people were doing harm to one another, where it was just sin was the only thing that was on their minds at every hour of the day. This is all they thought about. A society of pleasure and self-focus, self-centeredness. And so Enoch had a message to preach. Now this is recorded in Jude verses 3, 4, 14, and 15. Now this is in the New Testament, and this is where one of the disciples of Jesus, not one of the original apostles, but a later disciple, was writing about Enoch, and he said, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt I had to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once entrusted to the saints. For For certain men whose condemnation was written about long ago have secretly slipped in among you. They are godless men who change the grace of God into a license for immorality and deny Jesus Christ, our only sovereign and Lord. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all the ungodly of all the ungodly acts that they have done in the ungodly way, and of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So Enoch prophesied or preached about God's judgment. Evil was in the world. God was going to judge the world because of all the evil that had happened, because they were thinking of nothing else, just evil all the time. And God, being a just God, is bound to be the judge. Another thing that the Bible records that Enoch did was he left planet Earth without experiencing death. Let's see where that's at. That's in, again, back in Genesis 5. Down, let's focus on 23 and 24. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, because God took him away. Very interesting passage if you look at it by itself. In the New Testament, there's comments about it. So let's look and see what the New Testament says in the book of Hebrews. By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. So basically the writer of Hebrews here is quoting the Old Testament, almost word for word here, or word for word. He says, and was not found because God had taken him. So he's basically, Enoch left the planet because God took him away. Now I went and looked up in the original Greek what word taken away there was, and the word is, let's see if I can pronounce it correctly, metatithemi. Metatithemi. And metatithemi has a literal and a figurative sense to it. Literally, it means causing to change from one place to another, to transfer, to bring to, or to transplant. So this is a movement of physical location. But figuratively, there's also an alteration that happens, a change that happens. In this sense, we're talking about when he was taken away from the physical world that we know, that's around us, that we can touch and see, and that we all experience, taken to a place where God exists. And so the implication is that when you move from this place to that place, you have to change. Now this is an artist's conception of Enoch being translated, and now they show him like being lifted up into the sky. And now there's other examples of this, and I could have went into and could have added 15 more slides about other examples of ascension. Of course, we know that Jesus ascended when he was raised from the dead, and after he had preached and showed everyone his body, he was taken up and into the sky until he disappeared into the clouds. There's also another example in the Old Testament of the prophet Elijah, and he had a follower, a person who was going to take over him, an apprentice, if you will, and Elijah told Elisha that he was going to be going away. And then before long, Elisha saw Elijah being taken up into the sky. And Elisha added some detail. He said he saw chariots of fire taking him away, whatever that meant. But I've always actually imagined the translation of Enoch as not being this type of ascension. I've always kind of imagined him just kind of fading away out of sight.